it's all, I guess the normal thing is wait a few minutes past, it seems, but up to you, Cameron. It's all yours.
Yeah. I tended to wait till 2 past.
Juliet, Barbara, you're welcome to turn your camera on, I guess, if you'd like to.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see everyone's faces.
So we'll wait until about another minute or so, just to make sure everyone gets in, on the basis that our experience of online meetings these days is that everyone's rushing from one to the next one.
Is anybody in New Zealand rushing from the previous meeting to this one, Adam? Or is it just everybody's sleeping right now? And
yes, it's 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, the downside of organizing, helping organize a festival when you're on the wrong side of the time zone.
Yeah, I always joke that like the Pacific time zone is the edge of the world, but you guys are kind of on the other edge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The upside is that the bandwidth is good now.
No one else is using internet at 4 in the morning.
I'm the only one in New Zealand. Ah, Sophie. Great.
Okay, should we make a start?
Sounds good.
Great. So welcome everyone to slightly different format fireside chat for Open Publishing Fest. My name's Cameron Neylon, and with John Chodacki, we've been running a series of chats through the Publishing Fest, and we thought it'd be fun to take the opportunity to talk to some of the organisers and some of the people who've been running sessions through the 2 weeks to see everyone's experiences, what motivated them to get involved. So we've got a few people lined up, but equally we'll be happy to chat with all of you during the course of about an hour to hear about what your experiences were as part of Open Publishing Fest and perhaps where we go from here. Though I don't feel that Adam's, given that it's 5 o'clock in the morning for Adam, he may be thinking that the best place to be going from here is back to bed. But maybe I'll start, John. So, where did we start with this? What was the idea of the fireside chat? So now you will notice if you've been paying attention, we have competitive firesides, of course.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we had talked about how to get involved in the Open Publishing Fest. So last year at Force 11, at the Force 11 conference in Edinburgh, Coco organized a Open Publishing Awards, which was it really did take months. I mean, it was a lot of months of preparation of like getting people to nominate into the awards platform, and there was a set of judges that had gone through and evaluated projects, and there was an award ceremony in Edinburgh. And Adam had asked Cameron and I to be involved in that as judges, and there was a lot of judges, and I think a lot of the people from that actually started to think about how to get involved in this year. And so I know that Cameron and I had a conversation about how could we get involved, and talked to Adam about how to get involved. And it was, at the time, I mean, the Open Publishing Fest idea was still like trying to focus on formats. I think a little like, you know, what are different formats to bring people in. So like maybe we could have demos, we could have fireside chats, we could have panels, we could have like, let's try to make it let's have performances, let's have formats that are different. So I think we started with the idea of a fireside chat just because it sounded like an interesting format. And then I think over time, more people started jumping in, and the whole fest became a little more festive, and it was less about formats and more about just doing stuff that everybody found was interesting. And so for us, we were still like the people who had that format as the guided principle. And so, you know, it was only 2 weeks. We didn't want to do one every day, so we were kind of thinking like 6 to 8 would be great. And so we divided and conquered and came up with something, try to do a little promotion around the format, and I think that's about it. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Cameron? Is it?
I'd really started from the idea that I was interested in digging a little bit under the surface with people, to what it was that was really motivating them to do the things they were doing. I mean, we often hear the sort of exciting stories or new products or big problems. And I thought it would be really interesting to just hear the journey people had taken to where they are and what they're doing, and how that maybe amplifies the reasons for what they're doing or building or making or trying to change.
Yeah, the format does speak to that. I mean, it was awesome because we talked to people and we learned, we intentionally asked them about like their career and where they came from and what's their journey. Because a lot of the conversations we have with people in the community, it's about what they're doing right now and not about how they got to where they are, you know. And I thought that was yeah, I like that part of the format.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, I mean, for everyone's benefit, we did in fact argue about the firesides and the fires and how to manage that. It was just about getting a little bit beyond the sort of everyone sitting at their desk in front of their laptop kind of experience, which I know many of us have spent a lot of time feeling like that's been our world for the last 3 to 6 months or 25 years, depending on how you think about it. So that was a big part of us trying to make the whole thing a bit more informal. So I guess, I mean, turn to you, Adam and Dan. I mean, just the festival came out of a conversation that you were having. What was your vision for that at the beginning, and where did that come from?
I think Dan and I were involved in putting together editorial community meeting, and like all meetings, you know, these had sort of gone remote. And so we were sort of just jamming about how it would be nice not to take a conference and put it online and do something else. So we got to that point, and then we pondered what could come next. And I had this sort of moment where I thought, okay, I'm going to riff on doing something bigger that was connected to the publishing awards, because the publishing awards were really successful last year of bringing people together and celebrating on this larger, you know, not a cocoa project, but you know, put an event on which had a larger scope. And so I pitched this. My working process is often I come up with some kind of wacky idea, and then I generally pitch it to John Chodacki, who takes all the crazy bits off and puts it back on the ground. So I think I went through that process with John, and then also with pitched it to Dan, and then from there it's just a very lovely collaboration of sort of evolving this, and also Julian from Coco, an important part of that as well. Julian actually built the entire website. We looked for a technical mechanism to support this all, but we didn't really know what we wanted to do in a way. You know, it was evolutionary, so we needed something to evolve, and Julian did just a remarkable job that software is all free for anybody that wishes to duplicate it. And I'll leave that to Dan if he wants.
So yes, so I attended my first editoria meeting in December of last year in Chicago, and you know, there were a lot of elements I was really struck by. The one thing that I think came up again and again was that COCO was a community of communities, and this phrase I think was really important because I could see the work that was being done was to connect a lot of different sectors who were doing similar work. And I had experience doing similar things. I'm based here in Austin, Texas, and had for the last few years put on events with South by Southwest, with the arts community here. And so this idea of a community of communities, I think, like decentralizes an event, which makes it potentially really successful, because what we're doing is, and this is actually something that to give credit to Julian for putting this into such great words, is we're trusting everyone participating to kind of carry the ball and do what they would like to do, in the hopes that, you know, the scaffolding that we create is enough to bring people together and to support one another. And so when Adam started to talk to me about this idea, I thought of these events that I had put on in Austin, and we had thought about ways in which we could just kind of broadcast this widely and hope that people came in and proposed their own events and hosted their own events and were empowered to do whatever they thought might be appropriate in this space. And you know, the cool thing is we expected, especially because of the very brief timeline, you know, we had thought about this whole thing, maybe, I think it's been 6 weeks now since this whole idea even started. You know, we thought we would get maybe a couple events a day, you know, maybe 30 or so. And I think now we're over 150 sessions total, and they, you know, are happening in many different languages, in Tamil and Indonesian and French and in Spanish. And, you know, that was what was really, really meaningful, is that we were able to get this kind of participation, and that so many different people, you know, just came in. For example, Fred with Radio Antidoto, you know, knew right away what to do. As soon, you know, all we had were a couple of lines of a concept, and right away came up with an amazing program that I would have never thought of myself. But so many different people could take this, and it all still fit under this tent that we created. So yeah, that's how it all kind of evolved, I think.
I guess that, I mean, a lot of that philosophy links back to ideas around open source and community enabling, that I think both of you have been, well, all three of you, Adam, Dan, and John, have been involved with for a long time. So I guess, is it an event that reflects and builds on those experiences of community building and open source?
I think I'm actually a bit of a critic of open source culture in general. It's very monocultural. It can be very toxic. So I don't see it actually being so much connected to that as connected to maybe more homegrown notions of community, you know, like, and actually even getting away from what we do a little bit and, you know, being able to follow something we're passionate about, but be human in that context, you know. And I think many publishing conferences are kind of, you're in your professional dress. So I would say it's more about old school community, you know, like being people first, talking about what we're passionate about, being kind and respectful to each other, yeah, and it's been some of the most rewarding stuff, is to jump into the various sessions and see someone who's putting on one session and somebody else's session really engaged in the conversation. Yeah, so I'd say it's more like old school community building. That would be my response.
Yep. Well, and letting people, I guess, again, as we're talking about our pandemic haircuts or lack thereof, letting our hair down a bit as well. So I could turn to you, Julia. You've been involved in the festival and engaged in it and in various sessions. What drew you in, and I guess tell us a little bit about what you've done and experienced through the festival.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Julia. I'm from Book Dash. We're an open source or open licensed children's book publisher based in South Africa, Cape Town, just in case people didn't know. And yeah, we were also, our founder, Arthur, and Adam have known each other for a while. And we were nominated and won an award in the Open Publishing Award last year. So that was my first kind of connection with Adam and the Coco Foundation and this whole community, which has been great. But we didn't get to go to the physical handover or event, and it was all quite kind of it wasn't. I didn't feel a deeper understanding or connection of the community so much, apart from doing the nomination and receiving the award, which was great. So when Adam first approached us around this festival, I got really excited about the opportunities to present more about the nuances of what Book Dash does, because we're also, apart from being a publisher and an open license publisher, we're a non-profit and a kind of social impact publisher with all the books we give away for free as well, physical copies. So I feel always traversing these worlds of the social impact non-profit world and the publishing world. And sometimes I don't get to focus on the publishing open access side of what we do as much as I'd like to. So this for me, and the tone that Adam set when he spoke about it, and what I'm hearing as well now, everyone, the way that we're talking about it being human is talking about what we're really interested in, taking away a bit of the kind of superficiality of conferences and just being people who love publishing and making or increasing access to knowledge and whatever it is that we publish. That really drew me in, because we've been asked to participate in a lot of things recently that I have not really taken up to this degree, because there's so much going on. But I think the tone that the Open Publishing Fest team set out was really appealing. And that means I wasn't that surprised when I saw how many amazing events were going to take part as well. So Book Dash did 3 events. Also, just to say, I don't PR and promotional events and getting people to listen to what we do is not really my thing or my forte. I don't spend a lot of time on that. But we took this quite seriously, and I was so pleased to see how many people attended the 3 events that Book Dash did put together. We did one with Barbara and Adam around book sprints and facilitation, remote bookmaking on a deadline. And we had a fireside chat with our founders, which was amazing because it's been 6 years since Book Dash started. And the founders now are not really involved in the operations at all. They sit on the board. And for them to reflect on the origins of the organization was, I think, so heartening for them and amazing for me to learn from, even though I was involved from about 6 months after. A lot had happened in that 6 months that I didn't know about. And I think, all that have been fans of Book Dash loved hearing about where it came from. And then, we did a session on the power of open and featuring stories around that people might not have known, even though we post on Facebook and blog about it or whatever, around how the books are used all around the world and translated and adapted to sign language and, powering small independent publishing in Norway for increased diversity in children's books. Really exceptional stories that I've heard before and was even moved by then, and a lot of people that hadn't heard them were really moved by the power that what it showed to me is that open as a concept is fine, but if no one takes it up, it doesn't mean anything. And so to show the world that these books are not just open license, they are actively used and translated and adapted to reach more and more children all around the world. That was amazing. Yeah, and I wrote to Adam yesterday to just say thank you. And there were a couple points where I thought, oh, why am I doing this? Why am I making more work for myself? Is Bookdash going to get anything out of this? Because we're a very small team, and just after the last event on Wednesday, I thought it was the most amazing opportunity to force some active reflection on where we are, where we've come, and to actively connect with our community in the publishing and the open world.
I think that's great. I feel like that was a big part of what the goal here was connecting up those different threads. I know if my colleague Lucy Montgomery was here, she would make the point that we don't think enough about books or communication in general in terms of the communities they create around them. But we also don't always think about the communities we're creating around the production of those objects and books either, at least perhaps not in the traditional publishing world. Maybe that's the pace for a bit of this more radicalism. If I could turn to you, Bianca. So you ran a session, or you ran at least one session that I was aware of. There have been a lot of sessions that I haven't kept track of. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, and perhaps also a little bit about what happened afterwards?
Yeah, sure. But first, maybe also building on what Julia said. What I really liked about the Open Publishing Fest when I saw that it was happening and what it was becoming was that I was a bit critical last year about the publishing awards, because I know the intention was to celebrate all different initiatives and diversity also in those initiatives. But in the end, because it was an award, it was still had an element of competition, and in the end, only the award winners got the most publicity or exposure. And what I really like with this one is that it opened the floor to any initiative or anyone who wanted to put up something, a discussion or whatever, to do that. So in that case, I really thought this was a celebration in a way that I really liked. And also that the discussions were less about just presenting an initiative, but also what Julia said, very much in-depth discussions also in the Fireside chats that I really enjoyed. As to our own session, that was on principles around collaborating on open infrastructure, which is of course a strand of thought that started with your own principles, Cameron, and has been taken on. And is now in my country, in the Netherlands, really come to the fore with the recent negotiation with Elsevier and the concomitant publication of also guiding principles for these kind of collaborations. And I felt it was a good fit, also following the Fireside chats you had with Caitlin and also with Amy Brandt and Claudia Spezi. And also because I thought it important to have the discussion not just in the Netherlands, but to open it up a bit wider, to raise awareness of that this was going on, and also just to see myself what other people thought of that. So that's why we put up the panel discussion last night, which was also, for me, really nice to do something like that was different from your general Skype and Zoom meetings that we have every day. It was really organizing something, and I know a lot of people were nervous. I was very nervous, and that was actually a very nice feeling to feel that again. And afterwards, we also had, when the recording was off, and a lot of people just hang on, and we had a really nice discussion just that lasted for about an hour. That almost felt like what you have after conference when you go out with some people and you chat about like anything and everything. And that was also a really nice feeling of connection that I didn't realize how much I missed perhaps until that happened last night. So it was quite special.
Yeah, and I guess we've all been struggling with the disruption to how we're operating, but also trying to find new ways of working and operating in our day to day. I guess that makes a nice transition actually to talk to Barbara about your sessions, but also be interested to hear. I know that Book Sprints, after a very long time focusing on events that were very intentionally in person, have started necessarily experimenting with the not in person that we're all dealing with. So it'd be interesting to hear about how that sort of transition's played out, and what does that tell us about meetings and conferences, and perhaps what a festival like Open Publishing Fest can achieve.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, I mean, you have been through these intense in-person book sprints, so you know how hard it is to imagine to get that same sort of process going. I think what we learned from it, and it's really interesting to see in comparison with this Open Publishing Fest, is the power of facilitation really holds true. You can facilitate that sort of intense collaboration online. We had a super interesting panel with Julia from Book Dash. They also just did their first experiments with virtual book dashes. And we had very similar experiences that we did make it work, but with some adjustments. And in comparison with the Open Publishing Fest, I thought it was so interesting that where we go full on facilitation, a lot of guidance, a lot more than even in person. There's the person of the facilitator is really explaining every single step and guiding people from A to B to C. That here at the Open Publishing Fest, none of that existed, and it still worked amazingly. So sometimes I almost missed a little bit sort of like that central place, like the moderator that existed in some of the sessions that I saw, and in others it was very much self-organized. The calendar, the website did an amazing job as sort of being that central meeting place and guiding me through the different sessions. And I think that's something for me as a facilitator who has maybe trust issues and control issues. I really want to be in control of the group. It's amazing to see that this kind of self-organization can also work in very different ways, but also in really nice ways. I mean, I had the panel with Julia in the first week, and then by the end of the first week, Adam approached me and said, I put another panel on the calendar for the second week. So even during the festival, the program was still growing. No, we just sort of made it up and was like, oh, should we do it this day or that day? Maybe let's change the day. And having that sort of that trust that you were talking about earlier, and seeing the community just stepping up and organizing themselves was another really good experience that is very different from a virtual book sprint, but also working very well. Julia and I, in the conversation about virtual book dashes and virtual book sprints, also touched a lot about this sort of trust issue and how to make community happen, how to get sort of the socializing aspect in, the human aspect. Yeah, there's apparently very many different ways of doing it, and I think motivation is the main factor behind it. No, if people are motivated enough and they really want to get into the space and communicate and exchange, then you create the space. And it's the same thing we do in the book sprint. No, we provide a space, and the Open Publishing Fest did that. No, with even just the website, and people could even provide their own Zoom or a big blue button or whatever. And then people will step into that space and make it their own. That was really nice to see. Julia mentioned it. I think they did an amazing job doing PR for our session. At Book Sprints, we did a little bit, but we were enviously seeing at what Book Dash was doing. And this sort of self-organized PR, I also really enjoyed it. Like, everybody was sort of bringing their own audiences to their sessions. And that's definitely something that we can't do at an in-person conference, no? So it's something that I also really enjoyed, that we could, approach very different people, and every session could have a very different audience, and some who might not go into any of the other sessions at all might just be very interested in one particular sort of theme of the festival, and just choose that. So that sort of openness that you cannot have in real space, because you kind of have to limit it to a certain number of people. I really enjoyed that. And speaking of openness, the way the festival was set up also to invite performers and sort of different formats, I really loved that. I recommended my friends from Manila, who are amazing drag queens, and they did a performance every day. And I mean, where do you get to see that, right? That's something that is, I think, speaking of revolutionizing, the different communities, I think that's something that is super special, and it can only happen because this is now online, and it is so sort of self-organized and open and flexible, and seeing all the reactions of people to the different sessions. and having really good conversations. Yeah, it was very interesting for me, and I learned a lot about it also from the perspective of a book sprints facilitator.
Yeah, so that theme of trust and enabling communities, but I did definitely get this notion that there are more communities engaged. There's something really quite different we can do when it's not a single physical space that a particular community is holding. So on the subject of trust, I believe your microphones are open. So if people want to jump in and comment, then they should feel free to do so. If you feel less comfortable with that, then by all means throw some questions for anyone into the chat window, or chat in the chat window as you use the spaces you want to. So I can keep asking questions, but I'll leave some space for people to jump in. I kind of wanted to go to John though. I mean, John, you organise a lot of meetings, and over the last however many 10, 15 years, I've been involved in a lot of small scale, large scale meetings. What do you take from this experience of an online festival that you would think of taking into future, hopefully, in-person meetings? Are we learning something about in-person meetings from this process as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I am involved in, like, Bianca and I are both involved in Force 11, and there's meetings in Scarlett Institute that Force 11 runs. You've been involved in Force 11 in the past, and I also am involved in CSV Conf, which is kind of a small scale data makers conference, and it just happened maybe 2 weeks prior to this, and we had to move it virtually, and so it's kind of been an interesting journey because that is much more of was a structured conference that was going to be held in person and then had to transfer to virtual. And then this, which was kind of born digital and thought like, we're going to go straight to virtual. And I think both of those experiences, one right after another, I mean, there is a lot of the element of trust in the sense that CSV Conf, the format is very much about the community. It is very welcoming, just like people talking to each other. And I think that's why it's successful. And that same kind of tone is here, but without the need for curating, So one of the things that we're talking about here is like bringing people together and trusting that they're going to create a good program. If you create the theme, just open the space and the program will come. So then it's like, well, why are we creating gatekeeper type of events all the time? And so I think there is a piece of that I think is a learning experience for all of us. It's like, you want to create a welcoming place. So even successful conferences like CSV that have created a welcoming space, they're still creating these like kind of gatekeeping functions. And so do we really need that if we have the right communities in place? Maybe another one is that, maybe not always focusing on the positive. Virtual, it's hard. It's like, it's not easy. Like, you're talking to the void, it's just like, it's just not the same in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that maybe helped with Open Publishing Fest is that we were, every little event was personalized. So it wasn't like just moving a talk or a presentation onto the internet. It was developing it for the internet, with the internet talking to each other, like we were talking about with the Fireside chat format, like to not be so, don't make it feel like you're talking to a Zoom call or something. Really try to, even just the positioning of the camera makes people feel like it's more of a personal discussion. And so I think that the overall feel of Open Publishing Fest and the tone of it made it so that each session could be more personalized and more comfortable instead of it just being like a presentation into the void. And I think that it's also, 150 sessions is amazing. But it's also, as Dan or Adam was saying, it's only with 6 weeks. I think that like there is kind of an opportunity for something like this to really galvanize, like a South by Southwest kind of a thing where, the really cool ideas come from not even the people in maybe the publishing or the open space, but then like the 3 or 4 degrees of separation that could possibly come once it got more connections or more adoption. So I think the opportunity there is really great. Yeah.
If I could just jump in, as far as, I think, John, you really brought up a lot of important points about setting a tone and making this welcoming. And this was something that Adam, and I'll let Adam, you can speak more to this, but when Adam first came to talk to me about this idea, I think he really had a very like joyful vision as to how this could all be. And you know, as you can see with the logo that was developed by Kevin Munoz and the way the website was developed by Julian, that I think that is really significant in translating Adam's vision for this being something of, you know, of that festival feel that you would have, you know, if we could all meet, you know, in a field somewhere and hang out. I think that really matters insofar as like making this approachable to people, allowing people to not feel pressure to create something overly formal, allow people to realize that their work would be something that the public would really like to know more about. You know, again, as you say, John, with gatekeeping. So maybe Adam, if you want to talk a little bit about that initial impetus as far as creating this specifically as a fest, you know, not as a conference or something like that.
Yeah, well, strangely enough, I've actually in my past lives put on events like in 2000 in Amsterdam, and it's involved heavily in the activist scene, and streaming media had just come alive, and I was a radio artist and activist, and I had Net Congestion was this bringing together of activists and artists in a real space conference in various venues in Amsterdam. But it sort of explored this notion of streaming media and how it could sort of become part of it. And back then, this sort of thing would have been a real dream, you know. And so, so I've been involved in, you know, like putting events on which built community and you know, added to it, and we're pushing the boundaries a little bit about what an event is. Did another series called Remote, which was about centers and peripheries, about having an event somewhere. This is also early 2000s, and then having people taking that event to somewhere very isolated. I did it in Regina in Canada, for example, and then having all these international presenters presenting that might not otherwise go there. It was, and back then that was like, you know, newish, and it was like very exciting. And coming back to this festival, it was really nice for me to feel that all of these sort of like old notions when I used to do event organizing were able to come back. And one of the things I appreciated, like I remember being in Net Congestion once, this festival in Amsterdam. I remember like I was running around, a very small crew putting it on. And I remember once being underneath a table, plugging in Ethernet cables, you know, back in the old day. And I heard 2 voices, and I knew these 2 people from different parts of the world, and I knew that they didn't know each other. And I heard them sit down at the table and meet for the first time. And while I was under the table, you know, nobody could see me, and realize who each other was, you know, and meet each other. And this was one of the most memorable moments I've had from event organization. And I think there's something about that, you know, in the fest, is not to take a conference and put it online, but create an environment. That's why we took the tent idea, right? The tent is something you breeze in and out of, and it's very open. And we even, like Dan and I, really iterated on like that tent icon. It doesn't look welcoming enough, you know. We want the door to be more open and to be more joyful. So this was very much part of the whole concept. And I think that worked very well. I mean, the only downside is that we're very disappointed to have one session that was badly bombed. That was, and that kind of wrecks the moment. You know, it's horrible to have that sort of roaming, sort of malignant presence. I'm very happy that it didn't happen more often, but very sad for that one event where it did happen. And it's just, I just don't understand that mentality. But yeah, so that kind of ruins the buzz, you know, a little bit, but for that event and for those people, and doesn't feel good. But you know, overall, I think this joyfulness was really preserved, and I think played very well. And you know, and Julian did an amazing job, as did Dan designer Kevin. Did an incredible job with the design, just making it bright and buoyant. And also, like, just, you know, as a segue, I wouldn't mind throwing to Fred, who is an old school activist hacker friend of mine. I think he thinks, as I do, that old school is a compliment when it comes to, you know, hacker and activist. Known him since Amsterdam, that old days, and Radio Antidoto was, I think, a fantastic part of the event as well. I don't know, Fred, if you want to say something about that. You're muted, I think. Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you for such nice compliments. Actually, it's mostly the work of the collective. They liked the idea to participate to the festival because of a lot of interest in, you know, open content publishing. Radio Antidoto, Antidoto means the antidote, no? Is a side. I mean, started as a side project. We were supposed to do in Perth, and the pandemic hit, and we were a bit frustrated. Someone said, "Okay, what shall we do?" And let's do online. And with my friends, of course, I knew, but everybody got stuck by the amount of censorship that there is. If you try to listen to a song on a Facebook stream, so we radio, and now there is people participating every week. There is a broadcasting, and well, I expected that, but it was very nice to see how the language of radio is so powerful for conveying emotional content and time enough to have proper discussion, or anyway listen one to each other. That was the most interesting thing. And really the whole team threw themselves into doing the program. We divided more or less randomly who wanted to do something in our slot. It was often in Italian to involve everyone, so it was having a lot to say. Also Italian, we thought it's fantastic. It's a good argument actually for an open publishing to allow publishing in many more languages and allow complexity and stuff. And it was a very nice experiment. We're going to have a talk between ourselves Monday to see, to try to wrap up the experience. Personally, I've seen very interesting software, but I'm also a little bit interested in these things. So I was interested in the development of some techniques of software and some techniques of facilitation. Yeah, books. I mean, books and radio is really the thing for the next 10 years. I'm not going to say bad words, but social media hype is too much hyped. People love content if it's brought to them in a welcoming way. They love to be involved, and they can bring very nice content as well. And it was very beautiful to be part of the festival for a bit.
I think that element of openness around the content, and I just keep coming back to the different connections between communities. I guess language again is a great example of that. So yeah, I mean, the notion that we had sessions in Tamil, and I think Dan said Bahasa Indonesian, is just a testament to what you can do when you create a space where more than the standard groups that come together. I guess, Julia, was the Tamil session organised as part? Was that connected with Book Dash? Or is that?
It wasn't, as far, well, I know it wasn't, and I don't know how they heard about it, because we do also work with the same organization that organized it, and the books do get translated into Tamil. So it was very cool to see and learn more about what they're doing as well. And as you're talking, and as Fred was talking, I was thinking, you know, I should have done a bit more work to encourage some of our partners that translate the books and republish them or adapt them or whatever to host their own sessions. And if this were to happen again, I'd definitely reach out in that way and try and, you know, spread the reach of the festival into other language communities as well within Africa, but around the world where the books are get reused.
Yeah. So I guess that was the Tamil Tamil ebooks who were also involved in the Open Publishing Award as one of the nominations. Yeah, I was following. I was at a moment when I had spare time yesterday, I think it was. So I thought I'll get onto a session, and I thought about dropping into the session in Spanish, but then I thought that would probably not be useful for the other people that have been asking questions.
I think this issue around like multilingual and multiple cultural references and like the ScholComm and the open publishing world it's something that we're all trying to figure out. And I think it does end up being it creates a special like set of circumstances for us when we're doing virtual global. You know, because I think one of the things that I think of when I think of this playful tone and the ability to keep things casual while still talking about serious issues, like this is something that is not necessarily an American ideal, you know? Like South by Southwest in the US was really successful because it was different. It wasn't really like the way we do things. And I think that the fact that Open Publishing Fest, you know, it's not an American thing. So for me as an American, like I can tell in the tone of it that it's a little more playful than something that I would personally create. And I think that also goes into, which makes it global, right? I mean, like that's a global thing where it's like, wow, for me personally, I go like, okay, this is something that's a little bit off of my cultural reference. And I think the same is true when it comes to like languages and trying to create a welcoming space for languages. It's really hard. I know like Bianca and I, like on the Force 11 board, there's a lot of discussion about creating more infrastructure and more space and more discussion about how to create multiple languages and multiple cultural references when it comes to like scholarly communications. And there's a lot of interest in creating working groups and ideas around how to do that. And it's very difficult because how do you do that without then co-opting those spaces? And so I was really excited about, like, for example, the Open Tamil ebook session, because it's like organized by people in the Tamil speaking world for themselves. You know, it's like, it's not about me, it's about them. So but also being able to utilize the same type of communities and global communities. And so I think we all have to figure out how to better negotiate that. But man, it's like, it's really complicated. It's really difficult to do, and no one's done it perfectly yet. So it's still like, it's a journey, but I was excited about this fest actually being embraced by multiple language groups. Yeah.
And I think, and also the flexibility that gives people the ability to work in multiple time zones, even if Adam is up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And is actually up for several hours, I know for a fact, because he did a session about 2 hours back. But the power to actually deliver programming in the time zones that people actually live is potentially quite exciting too. I particularly, I think, heard from Julia's comments, but also from Fred's, the notion that we've all been surprised and excited, and maybe we do want to go. We haven't necessarily completely engaged with all the possibilities, but we want to go on and think more about this. So it'd be great to hear about what people are thinking about, that they want to go back to or revisit, or maybe watch those sessions that were in a different language that maybe have some automated closed captioning on them, and all those things. It'd be great to see the comments in the chat about what you might be thinking about doing next with this.
Can I say one more thing about the thing about virtual conferences and what we're seeing with openness? One thing I noticed, and I had a really interesting conversation with Eva Mendes about that last night on Twitter, is that these virtual sessions are on one hand really open to anyone who can participate. And we're also seeing a lot of interesting conversations in the chat, which I also really like because it opens up participation in these sessions for people outside the people who are presenting. At the same time, I think it takes away from what we were seeing with the real life conferences, where there was this sort of back channel, mostly on Twitter, involving a lot of people outside the sessions. And at least for myself, I've got the feeling I can deal with one back channel, so I can participate in chat, but I can then not simultaneously participate on Twitter to have that discussion in a broader sense. And Eva mentioned that as long as when you're not in these virtual sessions, you're sort of more outside of things than in a way that you could sometimes participate or see what happens, follow what happens with the more face-to-face conferences. And I thought it was a really interesting juxtaposition of what was happening.
Yeah, so we've still got the inside and outside the tent question, even if the tent is held quite open.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about time zones, not necessarily only with this virtual conference or festival, but I think particularly with this one, because there were so many events and there was no one time zone that was like kind of had more authority. So it could have been the middle of the night or the morning. And, you know, Cape Town and South Africa is in general very physically far away from everywhere, you know, and it's very expensive and taxing and time consuming to attend conferences and events and things. But suddenly we were at a very central time zone and everything kind of was incredibly accessible to South Africans. And I think that completely flipped the whole experience around. And it was amazing to experience that. And for our events to be accessible to people, you know, time zone has become a different way of measuring accessibility. I think that was really cool to experience.
Well, I suspect Adam's feeling this as well at this point in the pandemic, but I'm certainly getting really fed up with the time zone challenges of having to deal with the Australians early in my morning and the Californians late in my evening. So I guess it cuts both ways, right? The time zones, when it's a question of time, it can open things up, but when it's a question of travel, it can close things down, and vice versa. So, John, you unmuted yourself. You clearly wanted to say something.
Oh no, yeah, I was just going to say the time zone comment from Julia is so true. It's just, especially, I mean, virtual events. I mean, I know we're talking about this. This was a fest that's open 24/7, but that's still, I mean, obviously it's the reality of our world, but it's still one of the big challenges that we have is how do we kind of create something welcoming and that can be accessible and understood by the whole world. And it's like, accepting the challenges and then trying to find the best way to get the community going globally anyways. So it's just really difficult.
Yeah, and I guess I've been really excited by the synchronous, asynchronous. You know, there's problematic issues around recording as well, but having those recordings available is also so powerful. So Fred, you jump in.
Yeah, I just was thinking that for me, to have something that lasts 2 weeks. We're sure there are events I will not attend, but little by little I have a little bit of reference of people I can ask about what was interesting. So enlarge the time. If you cannot make everybody in the same space, the spaces cannot be constricted. To create a space in time is in my opinion, and also takes away a little bit the stress of being there and see everything, like in a one-to-one, a sort of idea of one-to-one, and instead try to build an awareness of what's going on and profit from it. We had a lot of time to put stuff, and of course not everybody would be coming, but the event would happen. And last thing I would like to ask is what is the idea about the catalog, because I'm very interested to see how it's going to be formed. Let's say a place where now I can go back and find all the little tools that have been used.
I think that's a really interesting question, the question of curating the content afterwards, and what does that mean about the community? What does that mean about expectations of openness and sharing, and what does that mean about the recording question? I think that remains an interesting question. But Bianca, you had another point.
I was just going to real quick that yeah, the idea, the virtual or in-person events are always get the question of like, well, are you going to record them for later? And this was successful in part just because at the very beginning the tone was set like, yeah, everything's going to be recorded. There's like just one of the things that was really important to set the tone.
Bianca?
Yeah, I think that was actually the point that I just made, but I'll second John's point about the recording, and that it was expected, and that it was also much easier and more natural to do that, because in a physical conference, yes, it's made clear that it's preferred, and still you only have like a small proportion of talks that actually do get recorded and shared. So I also think this makes it a lot easier for people to go back and to dip in and out of certain sessions. So that's definitely a plus. What I found interesting in our session yesterday that I didn't realize in the beginning, that for the Big Blue Button sessions, the chat is not included in the recording. So we said that in the beginning to make that clear, also to give people the freedom to say whatever they want in the chat. And then in the end, we had such a nice and rich discussion in the chat that I'm now probably going to go back to these people to ask if they would agree to have their comments shared as well. But I need to do that because we cannot just share them, because we said in the beginning that we wouldn't.
Yeah, I think there's a real question here. It's also coming into play with Force 11 Scholar Communication Institute, grappling with similar issues around how do we collect up the content and the material? What are the objects and the curation required to think about making this material available in a useful form? So I guess we're coming to the top of the hour. And one of the questions I had for the group as a whole, I know John and I have been thinking about the fireside chats and whether we want to continue doing that, whether there's an interest in that format continuing. So it'd be great to hear more generally from people around what they thought worked really well and what they'd like to see more of in the future. Where do we take this going forward? I'm allowed to use that kind of terminology. That's an open question to anybody who wants to jump in.
I mean, I got a fireside chat. For me, it was just that I agree. It was a very casual way for, especially during this time when we're not seeing each other, and it seemed like a nice way to have a conversation that brought not just us and the people we were chatting with, but also the community until it's more personal. And so I think that for me, that it actually seems like something that is for the time as well, just more informal conversations, speaking to a lot of the benefits of the fest tone in general, but just kind of to the format of that, of like, creating opportunities for everybody to just to be more casual, but then also catch up with each other or with what's going on in the space. It seemed like something I think would be good to continue.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think in terms of content and format, it's a format that we're missing a bit right now with, like I said before, with all the Zoom meetings and all the conference that are put up like conferences. More laid back and a really in-depth conversation. I think it really meets a need. So I would love to see it continue.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'll jump in, Dan, because I was going to say we're coming to the end of the time. So what I will do is pass over to Dan and Adam for their final reflections and to take us out.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, and I'm excited for Adam to talk more about this. This idea I talked about at the beginning that I think Coco has enacted so well, this community of communities, was really great to see realized in this format. So we were able to. So I'm the associate director of Punctum Books, and we were able to reach out to our community and have a lot of really interesting events. And then Adam with Coco was connected to so many interesting people who, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear from otherwise. But, this was not just open access scholarship or Scalcom. It was also open source software. We had open hardware. We had authors reading. We had, demos of all different types of tools that will enable open publishing. And I think what it solidified for me is that we're not as much, the community of communities, I think, has grown toward a movement. And this is the energy that I hope that we can continue here. And I think that, what Adam's vision for this is really important, because I think this generosity in this format, in the way this is presented, has just, reflect what we've seen reflected back is generosity in the same way. And so, I think if that tone can continue on, we can really make significant headway toward helping a lot of people through open publishing, sharing knowledge. So I'll let Adam talk a little bit more about that as well. Oh, Adam, I think you're muted.
Muted.
There you go. Oh, no, it went off again.
You hear me now? Yeah, sorry. My apologies. I think the framing of the Open Publishing Fest, I've been working in scholarly communications for the last, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years. Before that, I was outside of that. And I think, and working in what was publishing, but I didn't realize it. And I think one of the things that's nice about Open Publishing Fest is it sort of brings into connection all these people from different places that actually from within scholarly communications and from without, which is, a larger universe, to realize that they have many things in common, actually, that they can learn from each other, and they don't have to feel that they're sort of like solving these things all for themselves. I think that's pretty interesting. And I think that there's almost, just speaking again about the scholarly communications sector, there's almost an artificial kind of boundary around it that I think should become more porous, because, if you look at something like Wiki Journals, it's very fascinating about they're exactly at this intersection of the web and scholarly communications, and they are exploring a lot of tensions around that area. It's just one of many, many examples, right? So I think there's a kind of an interesting possibility to, not frame openness as it is done in scholarly communications about open access, but as open publishing as a greater idea, and then and then just see what happens. So I think as a inverted commas movement, I think seems to be a lot of energy around that. Like this open publishing idea seem to all those things are out there. We've just sort of put it literally a virtual tent around it, and it has coalesced and made some kind of energy. And I've heard a lot of discussions about Cameron and John want to do the Fireside stuff, and that to me is an indicator that there's energy. If people don't do these things, continue these things on, unless they resonate, something's resonating, right? And also Dan has been talking about with Julian about making some sort of ongoing publication around these ideas as well. So yeah, I think that's the exciting thing, is that to be part of activating an energy and seeing where it goes, and letting it go, and letting it build up momentum. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where all this goes. I mean, I'm quite excited for it. This is the 2 weeks has already been, literally Dan and I thought 30 events, that would be great. It was the same with the awards. We thought 30 nominations, awesome. We got over 200, 150 events for the festival. I mean, it's crazy, and all because people are resonating to this idea and feel like being part of it. And I think that says something. Yeah. So I think this has got a really interesting future ahead. Yeah.
So I guess we've come to the end of the time allotted for chatting. Let's thank everyone who's been involved in the chat and speaking and commenting. And I'm going to let Adam explain what is coming next.
So we have been deeply honoured to have the COVID girls involved in the festival. This is a connection that came from Barbara from Book Sprints. Thank you, Barbara. Barbara spent some time in the Philippines, I believe met the COVID girls, and just recommended them straight off the bat as someone who'd be interested to be involved in performances. And they are just unbelievably good. I mean, like I've stayed up to 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 occasions, to watch the performances, and they have been fantastic. So, Barbara, do you want to say anything about, more about COVID Girls? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I had the great opportunity to meet the drag queens Precious and MC Black, who are here tonight, last year in Manila. And they have been in lockdown for 2 months now, I think, and have been doing online performances. And I was blessed to see them perform online before. And when Adam asked me if I know of any performers to come to the Open Publishing Fest, I immediately said, yeah, I know the absolute best performers. And if there's anything you can do online, I mean, they really know how to work a camera. And we've had a performance every day, and I was there. I think I missed 1 or 2. And it was the joy of my day, I have to say. So I'm super happy, Adam, that you invited them, and I'm super happy that they accepted the invitation and that they're here. Really, really incredible artists.
They are, and in fact, they are here. So I guess if Precious and MC Black want to take over the show, we can turn off our cameras and let it happen.